Okay, so today we leave the books about Israel's relationship with foreigners behind, and instead uh, we move on to poetry and wisdom literature. Here's our key concepts as always. Um, the Book of Psalms is popular with some people, not popular with others. Brief thought on why we should study the Book of Psalms. The Psalms are were originally worship songs for the ancient Israelites. A religion is not just an academic exercise the way we approach it in this class. Um, a religion is an experience with God. And in order to experience God, people worship God. Um, to truly understand a religion, I think you have to participate or at least have some understanding of their worship practices. And I think if we understand the book of Psalms a little bit better, it will help us understand how the Israelites approached and understood and worshiped God. That gives us a little bit better concept of their religion. Um, so first thing we need to note about the book of Psalms is how it's written. Um, if you were to tell me that you thought the Psalms were repetitive, you would be right, because the Psalms are written in couplets. Couplets that go line A, line B, line A, line B. And line A says an idea, and then line B repeats or intensifies the idea from line A. And we refer to that idea as parallelism. So I want you to know that Hebrew poetry is written using parallelism. The book of Psalms uses what is known as synonymous parallelism, where lines A and B of the couplet are going to say the same basic thing. Now make sure you understand that synonymous parallelism idea, because we're going to introduce something called antithetical parallelism when we get to the book of Proverbs next nerd session. All right, who wrote the book of Psalms? A lot of Psalms are attributed to David, although less than half of them are attributed to David. In addition, we suspect that David probably wrote some of the Psalms that are attributed to him, but he may not have written all of the Psalms that are written by him. And the reason for that is that he's a king. He's got lots to do, and he probably hired people to write things for him in his name or in his honor. The rough modern equivalent is oftentimes when a president makes a speech, sometimes he writes some of his speeches, oftentimes he doesn't. We know this because there are paid speechwriters on the staff of President Trump and were on the staff of President Obama before him and have always been on the staffs of presidents. And yet we still call it Trump's speech, Obama's speech, Bush's speech, whatever, because the speechwriters write it for the president. So the Psalms, some were probably written by David, but a lot we suspect were probably written by David's court officials for him, and so they get his name attached to them. So key takeaway here is that although we associate the book of Psalms with David, he probably wrote less than half of the Psalms. All right, so on this slide here, we have the structure of the book of Psalms. Something worth thinking about here is oftentimes we read the Psalms in a somewhat random order. You pick a random psalm, you read it, you turn it into a devotional, and we don't really think about how each psalm is connected to the next. And that's because, to a certain extent, they're not connected to the next, one to the next. You can have a psalm which is very depressing next to one that is all about creation. Nevertheless, over the years, we seem to, we think that we've discerned why the Psalms are in the order that they are in. And what we think is happening is that the book of Psalms is trying to retell the history of Israel in poetic form. And so books 1 and 2 are going to emphasize the reigns of David and Solomon, good, happy times. Book 3 is going to be a lot of laments that mourn the days of the divided kingdom and especially the Babylonian exile. And then books 4 and 5 are going to be books that are primarily about hope in the sense of the restoration of Israel and looking forward to the future when God will become king over the whole world. I would like you to know this slide inside and out very, very well for the test. This slide and the slides to come are explanations of how scholars think we have come up with this particular structure of how the Psalms are arranged. I'm not going to elaborate on this a lot. I'll just hit a few highlights on each slide. So what we notice in book 1 of the Psalms is that, by the way, I should have said this earlier, the Psalms are divided up into 5 books, but the size of the books is not even. There's 150 Psalms, but there's not, but each book is not 30 Psalms. So book 1 has 41 Psalms in it, and 39 of the 41 are attributed to David. The first 2 seem to function as general introductory Psalms to the whole book, and so then we have all these Psalms about David. So we can see that we're retelling the history of Israel by emphasizing David early on. In book 2, we have one of the few Psalms written by Solomon in there. We have Psalms by the sons of Korah who were temple singers during the reign of Solomon. And then we still have a lot of Psalms about David, although fewer so, and so we're beginning to transition more towards the reign of Solomon. In book 3, we see that the world has been turned upside down because good things are happening to bad people. And then overall, the book is going to end with an overwhelming cry of lament. And so the emphasis in these 15, 16, 17 Psalms is on bad days, reflecting on the fact that the Babylonian exile and the divided kingdom was a disaster for Israel. Book 4 is going to open with a psalm about Moses, which seems to be proof against this idea of the retelling of Israel, of the history of Israel. Moses should be before David. But Moses is not meant to be taken literally, but more of this idea of emphasizing the law. Moses represents the law. And if you think back to what we talked about a couple of nerd sessions ago, you'll remember that when the Israelites returned from the Babylonian exile, they had this emphasis on the law, as we saw in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah. And so this return to this emphasis on Moses. And so we have this emphasis on Moses as though Israel is trying to emphasize its own need to return to obedience to Moses. That's just more information there on book 4. Now we move on to book 5. In book 5, all of a sudden David shows up again. Lots of Psalms about David. But what's interesting about all these Psalms is that they're all about moments in David's life when David needed Yahweh's help. And what that says to us, along with the other Psalms, is that these Psalms are emphasizing the importance of Yahweh as king, not David as king, and that Israel needs to stop looking back on its past and hoping for a new David, and needs to put its focus in on trusting in God and seeing God as its true king. So what I think it's kind of cool to see this how Israel has arranged its worship book, its book of worship songs, to reflect the history of Israel. It speaks to the importance of its history and how it was necessary for the Israelites to reflect back on their history, to have the understanding that they need to look forward to the time of hope when God will be king. That's the hope and expectation for the Israelites. Now, today, we are not ancient Israelites, and so reflecting on Israelite history, I think, is useful, but maybe not the absolute most important thing. We can also read the book of Psalms as a journey of faith. If we read through the book of Psalms, we see that at the beginning, the person who writes Psalm 1 treats God almost like Santa Claus. If you're good, God will reward you. And there may be some truth in that. But that's a very simplistic understanding of who God is. By the time we get to the middle of the book of the Psalms, Psalm 73, which is the beginning of book 3 of the Psalms, the author of this particular psalm is not worried about God giving him gifts. Instead, he's just worried about God being there for him. Then when we get to the last psalm, Psalm 150, this person has gotten to the point where he or she expresses complete and total confidence in God because he's learned the past lessons of life. And perhaps this is saying to us that if we read through the book of Psalms, we too can learn the lessons of life, and we too can go from this simplistic understanding of why should I be a Christian? Well, so that God can be Santa Claus and give me good stuff. We progress from that understanding of God to this more sophisticated, in-depth understanding of God, where we say, I just want God to be near, and ultimately to get to the point in saying, I trust God no matter what happens, whether I get a reward or not, whether God is present or not, I trust in God fully and completely. On a brief aside, a personal note here, I would dare say that if you get to that level of faith and confidence in God, you are to be highly commended. I'm working on it, but I'm not there yet. It's hard to do that. If you have questions about that, I'd be happy to chat about with you or have a Zoom session or something like that. All right, let's keep going. All right. We transition from talking about structure to now different kinds of psalms. But before we do that, I feel like these things get kind of impersonal here. So I want to do a couple of shout outs here to a couple of you. Just want to say hi to Autumn, to Randy, Jackie. Hope you guys are doing well. Ashley, miss seeing you guys in class as well. Maddie, Naya. I think I've mentioned all ladies so far. Reese, Jonathan, miss seeing you guys as well. Hopefully we'll do some more shout outs as I continue to do a few more of these recordings for you guys. So now that we've done that, let's talk about different kinds of, let's talk about these different kinds of psalms. What I'd like you to know for the test is I want you to know the names of these 5 major categories and a little something about them. It's really pretty easy. This is pretty easy stuff to learn. Let me take you through each one. A psalm of praise. That's the first major type of psalm. There's a lot of them throughout the book of Psalms, and a psalm of praise does exactly what you would think it does. It praises God. By the way, you do not need to know which psalm goes with which category. I'm just saying that Psalm 104 is an example of a song of praise if you wanted to see this in action. Psalm 22 is an example of an individual lament, and that's our second type, major category of psalms. The way an individual lament works is you cry out to God, you express the problem, you say that Uh, Now, the problem is usually kind of vague and non-specific because psalms are usually said out loud and in public. So you don't want to air too much dirty laundry. And the psalms are written to be vague so that they can apply to a lot of people in a lot of different circumstances. So you say what your problem is, and then you ask for deliverance, and then you say, thank you in advance. Thank you in advance to God because you know that God is going to solve your problem for you. So you conclude with this prayer of this praise or thanksgiving. A communal lament works the same way as an individual lament, only the problem is bigger in scope. In an individual lament, grandma is sick. Mom and dad are sick. Um, I lost my job. Problems that are related just to you or your immediate family. A communal lament is something that affects the entire community. Hence, the problems are usually more specific. Famine. The Babylonians are going to come kill us. But aside from that change, an individual lament and a communal lament work the same way. Fourth major type of psalm, an individual thanksgiving. In an individual thanksgiving, you state what your problem was and then you thank God for fixing the problem. It has the same structure as an individual lament in a lot of ways. The difference is the problem is in the past tense in this case. So you're thanking God because your problem has already been solved. In an individual lament, you have a problem, you express thanks, but the thanks is because you know it will be solved in the future. Last major type of psalm, royal psalms. A royal psalm is defined not by the form, but by the content. A royal psalm deals with royal issues, kingship, enthronement, those kinds of ideas. And so a royal psalm has royal content. All right, those are the five major types of psalms, and they comprise around 2/3 of all the psalms. But you can see from this list here, there are a host of other kinds and types of psalms, so not everything's going to fit into those categories. All right, that's it for this particular nerd session. I will talk at you guys next time.